When you speak to almost anybody in any country, you say, when was the last time you stepped back from whatever it is that you're doing, you took yourself out and all of the things that you're doing, all of the situations that you're in, and you just breathed, and you just went,
Welcome to the CEO DNA. Here it's all about giving the best knowledge and information to CEOs, founders, and of course entrepreneurs who really want to change the world to build sustainable and meaningful businesses. In today's episode, I do sit down with Matthew Griffin, one of the world's most influential futurists and the mind behind the 311 Institute, Exponential University, and the World's Future Forum. Dubbed the fanatical futurist, or called by McKinsey the advisor behind the advisor, Matthew advised presidents, Future 500 CEOs, the UN, and beyond on how to navigate what's coming next, before most even know what question they actually should ask. But this conversation isn't just about trends, it's about truths. We talk about what governments do not want to hear and how to build really in an uncertain time something that stands out, and why being future when we might be less tech and more about courage. This isn't just an episode, this is the wake-up call. And let's decode the DNA of a man who doesn't just predict the future, he actually builds it. Welcome, Matthew.
well, thank you very much. I'm great to be here.
So what is for you a good DNA of a CEO?
There's lots of different things that sort of play a role in that, but curiosity, I think, has got to be probably the most fundamental one, combined with open-mindedness. I said, because increasingly a lot of the things that we're actually seeing today require an open mind. Right. If we said, for example, 2 to 3 years ago, that in the future we see the ability of artificial intelligence to build fully autonomous multi-billion-dollar businesses, the vast majority of CEOs that I traditionally would work with would say, that'll never happen. It's impossible. So when we have a look at the world around us, which is increasingly sort of science fiction brought to life, you have to be open mind. Don't discount something simply because you don't think it's not necessarily either plausible or don't think it's going to happen.
Yes.
Mental resilience as well is very, very strong. That always is very necessary for a lot of leaders today. So when we have a look at the vast majority of leadership teams, I think they see about 30% of that's here, let alone what's coming. And the speed of change is now so significant that, when we have a look at, for example, the Fortune 100 CEOs, the surveys that we've actually done suggest that the average CEO tenure has now declined by about 30% in 5 years.
Yeah.
Part of that is because of stress. Part of that is because the expectations set on senior leadership teams is so high. And from a shareholder perspective, shareholders say, the stock price is at toilet because something happened, new disruption, new technology, whatever. How did you not see this coming?
Right.
And it's like, well, among the 5 million things that are actually changing, I was focused on these. I never thought that was possible and didn't see it come. It's off my radar. So, the DNA of leaders, just as we see with regular DNA, I see of animals and organisms like us, it's not one thing, it's lots of different things.
It's quite interesting because so basically you predict the future and give the company certainty of what is most likely to happen. Is that correct?
Well, so I give them versions. So if I give them a version of the future based on the signals and things that we're seeing today, so I sort of give some examples. So in some cases we can predict the future.
Yes.
So there are a lot of futurists that say, as a futurist, we don't predict the future because it's impossible. We know that computing power is going to increase in the future. We know that artificial intelligences will become more performant, more capable. Right. These kinds of things. We know that hybrid and EV vehicles will probably get more traction, not less.
Yeah.
So there are all these little things we pull in. But a lot of organizations are ideally looking for certainty. So when you take a traditional leader, if they're putting together their 5-year vision or strategy, if you don't know what the future looks like in 5 years' time, your strategy is going to be wrong. if you don't take in the right kind of information, your strategy is going to be wrong. If you don't factor in speed, then your 5-year strategy is going to be way off. So when we think about sort of planning, ultimately from a leadership perspective, they need to do their best to try to quantify what's changing, how it's changing, which futures are more plausible, and then it's kind of like a high-low weighting.
Right. Interesting. I worked for 3 of the top 500 companies, and during my corporate time there, they asked me to do a vision of the future or to do a planning for 10 to 15 years. Yeah. I told them, guys, I don't have a crystal ball, I'm more an entrepreneur. I think, give me I can tell you maybe 12 months or let's tell 6 months. Yeah. How do you do that?
So it's a tricky thing to do, but I use something called counsels.
Okay.
So, for example, we'll take artificial intelligence as an example. So the vast majority of leadership teams basically will be focused on Google,
right,
OpenAI. Yeah. They will move from generative AI to agentic AI. They will then say, we don't know what these companies are going to do next.
Yes.
So when it comes to planning our ICT stack, our front office, back office functions, and et cetera, they say, because we don't know what these companies are going to come up with next, our ability to plan for those futures is diminished, if not impossible. However, when we actually have a look at this thing, you shouldn't really be looking at artificial intelligence as a set of companies or products. The constant of artificial intelligence is that it will improve in capability, it will improve in performance. The things that it can do and automate, right, will increase. Yeah. So that's the trajectory. So if we know that the artificial intelligences that we have today are going to be the stupidest versions of themselves, then we might not necessarily know exactly what the future versions will do, but we will know that they can do more. So if we look at marketing, for example, so we now start drilling it down. Today, as we know that artificial intelligence can automate particular marketing tasks. In time, it will start moving to autonomous marketing tasks to be used in instruction and through agentic AI, it just as often does everything. So from an AI perspective, those are the constants. From a technology perspective, as humans, we're always trying to automate more. Technology is always going to get smaller, right, more performant. When we have a look at politics, because again, so trying to figure out how the world works from a political perspective, bends much people's brains. What do politicians crave? The constants that politicians crave are power, re-election, security, influence, both direct and indirect influence, and so on and so forth. So now if we have a look, for example, at President Trump, or President Xi, or President Modi, basically through the lens of, as individual politicians, how do they ensure their relevance? How do they get re-elected if they're elected? How do they increase their influence? How do they improve the security of their countries? From an economic perspective, how do they grow? So when we start thinking about GDP and economic growth, the constant is that most countries want to grow their GDPs for a variety of different reasons. So when we have a look at the regulations and the regulations that come through, most regulations would align to how do we as an individual country increase our GDP. So that suddenly takes all of the regulations that would cripple the economy off the table. Yeah. So it's these constants that we kind of look at, and there's 50 to 100 different kinds of constants. And when you start breaking down these constants, that allows us to paint a picture of the future where we say, we don't know exactly what's coming. We don't know the name of Google's next AI product, but we do know that it's going to improve its levels of autonomous automation, right, performance and everything else. And so now we have a direction of travel for the future.
Because I see also lots of new new features, new products are actually out, but only some are getting also adapted, right? Yeah. Because we have the early adapter, but then of course lots of also nice to have. I was been in Silicon Valley and we're driving with this fully autonomous.
Waymos.
Yes, Bible. So oh, amazing. Yeah. I had a good feeling it will come all over the world because it's more convenient. It's probably cheaper at the end and not have a driver and and faster, of course. Right?
Well, I mean, if we take Waymos for example, so when we have a look at businesses,
right?
Yeah, we have lots of individual positions and roles and people and employees within a business.
Yes.
But ultimately, the function of the business is to make as much profit as possible while operating as efficiently as possible. That's kind of the base operating model.
Yes.
So when we have a look at, say, for example, the future of the workforce, how we lay out our technology, market development, product development, and everything else, it generally ties back into that. So if we think about Waymo, if someone said, what's the likelihood that Waymo will expand to every German city, for example? Well, there's lots of things at play. So firstly, are the cars affordable to produce? We'll sort of say, well, yes, and they're getting cheaper to produce. Can we see a need for this product? Usual thing, I'm going to say, well, yes, people want to get into a car and travel from A to C.
Right.
Can this be a profitable model? We say, well, yes. Now, from Google's perspective, when we have a look at Uber, for example, Travis Kalanick, it's our mission to get rid of the most expensive part of the car, the driver. So from Google's perspective, once they've bought the vehicles or leased the vehicles, every time you take a trip with them, all of that profit goes straight to Google. It doesn't go to the drivers. We don't have strikes and everything else goes straight to Google. So from Google's perspective, does a car that drives itself, that has minimal operating awareness, where the cost of the technology decreases substantially over time, so the cost per mile decreases substantially over time, that enables Google to make more profits, is that an attractive business to be in? And then you bring in safety, reliability, and everything else. And providing all these boxes ticked, you go, yeah, because the self-driving taxi market is estimated to be worth at least $5 trillion. So we get easy to market worth doing well.
Yeah. So I think I'm always thinking now, how can a CEO or founder who's listening implement that, right?
Yeah.
So basically, it does make sense to invest some time out understood already to look a little bit in the future and think how is my market developing, right?
Yeah.
It goes smaller. And on the second hand, of course, how can I participate with different features? But how can we really find the features? I mean, also, now, for example, for a software company, what would you say should we do? Or how did Apple do this? That they say, okay, we have now the smartphone, we have now the tablet, we have now the smartwatch. What do you wear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so, so the kind of old entrepreneur mantra of, the customer should be at the center of the universe.
I like that.
Yes. That still remains broadly true. However, if we think about market opportunity.
But does the customer always know what they actually need? But the patient always knows what the best medicine is.
But this is the thing. So what we see is from an entrepreneur's perspective, we're seeing a divergence now.
Okay.
So on one hand, as an entrepreneur, I can build a product that fills the need that is a good sized market that I care about, that I can make profit from, etc.
Right.
And I can sell that product to this group of people.
Yes.
However, as artificial intelligence increasingly becomes its own robo-customer, as an entrepreneur, do I now create a product that is specifically tailored for the algorithms who are buying products? So as I sort of mentioned on stage, today from a marketing perspective, we are trying to grab the attention of consumers. But if we see AI increasingly doing a lot of the purchases for us, algorithmically, then as an entrepreneur, should I be now developing a product that allows me to manipulate the algorithms that then show people my product or buy my product automatically? whatever that happens to be. Whether it's a piece of compute for the cloud, whether it's groceries, whatever else be.
Yeah.
So increasingly, even from an entrepreneur's perspective, we see this split. You've got human consumers, and then you've got, say, robot customers that are buying compute at the edge of the cloud, basically to do whatever they want to do. So that's the first change. And then the second thing sort of rolls up to, again, what's the need, market size? Am I interested as an entrepreneur in doing that? And with all the companies I work with, the vast majority of startups I work with say, when we're going into a market, we have to be differentiated. Right. So what market are you going into? And they'll say something. And you sort of go, that, whatever it is, selling chairs, is already a highly commoditized market. And they go, yes, but what we're going to do is we're going to be highly differentiated. Well, how are you going to be differentiated? Let's say customer service, product quality, etc. And so go, do you really think that your competitors basically will be saying, we don't care about the customer, we're going to create a shouting product, etc.? And they simply go, no. So on the one hand, I think that there are a lot of leaders and startups basically kind of have this hang that they have to be differentiated, they have to be special. The fact of the matter is, provided you build a good product that meets a market need and you're able to get it in front of people, and as a company you don't suck, you do care about your customer, your products are affordable and correctly priced. So that is the bedrock of a good solid business. So for example, if we have with my business, my principal competitors are companies like BCG, Bain, McKinsey, companies that will charge $100 million basically to governments basically for advice.
Usually, you're cheaper.
Yeah, I'm cheaper. So on the one hand, I can't undercut there. That's it. But there isn't a single market that isn't already commoditized.
True. It's
how you package everything.
Okay, when I try to look in the future now, very concrete, I talk on the one hand with key opinion leaders in the industry, right? So because I always think every industry has a few who really a bit advanced. I also I visited a friend in Silicon Valley who has an AI house. So the house opens, it's always an AI, the color schedule in the house, so everything is fully AI, right? So key opinion leaders. On the other hand, I also look for different studies that has been done with high impact factors. Sometimes I'm shocked that people know the alternatives of the football players and other people, but not of the key opinion leaders in the industry. Because when you look at Stanford or Harvard or some great universities, they have a lot of studies of one topic. And so I met the guy from Sample who wrote the paper for ChatGPT prompt engineer, Richard Zohar.com. The other I do is, of course, to as I said, interview key opinion leader, then of course look at studies, and I think that is also what else can we do to really understand what comes in the future. Well, so because one thing I do is also look at other industries, right? For example, or countries who are advanced. We are now, of course, in digital payment, so China is well advanced. So Alipay, WeChat had 95% of the online payments go through them.
Well, so for example, there are two reasons that organizations get disrupted.
Right.
So the first is you saw the future coming.
Yes.
And you did nothing about it. That's kind of a classic IBM case.
IBM
saw cloud coming through Microsoft and AWS. It was disruptive to their core business. So from a cultural perspective, they didn't really want to move. And then when they started seeing it eating into their strategic outsourcing business, it was too late to it. So IBM's a company lost up $65 billion, half their market cap. So on the one hand, you get disrupted because you saw the future coming and you just did nothing about it. For whatever reason, whether you didn't take it seriously, whether you didn't know how to lean into it, whether you were afraid of it, you didn't quantify it properly, etc., etc.
Yes.
And the other reason I say that you actually get the other reason you get disrupted is because it came from another industry. That's it. So, I mean, we have a look at the vast majority of industries. They will be most leadership teams will be looking at what their competitors are doing. Doesn't matter what the market is. Mercedes will be looking at what BMW and BYD are doing, maybe. When you have a look at Deutsche Bank, basically Deutsche Bank will be looking at Barclays and so on and so forth. So it's sort of be an example. So let's.
But then there's of course also Airbnb and Uber, who just come from the side and say that's disrupt.
Well, let's do it. So let's disrupt retail with a non-traditional company.
Yeah.
So we've got Amazon, the giant retailer. We've got, say, super apps where you can buy products.
Yes, correct.
Super apps, on the one hand, started eating into Amazon's share because we can buy in the super app.
Yeah.
However, if I went to most companies and said, right, I think that Visa has the opportunity to disrupt Amazon, the first response would be, no. They're a payments company. Absolutely not. So we come back to that open-mindedness piece. Visa has just released a shopping agent. Now, if you think about all the information that Visa actually has on, they know exactly what you bought, who you bought it from, et cetera, et cetera. They've got your entire payment history. Now, if Visa bring out an app that says, right, now we use the Visa agent, basically either within a super app or on your smartphone natively, to do your shopping, they've got all of your information, they've got all the payment information. There is absolutely no reason why Visa, provided they can execute properly, could start eating into Temu, could start eating into Amazon. So when we actually have a look at digital transformation, fundamentally, the biggest competitive sort of challenge that the digitization gives to most leadership teams is digitization erodes and or eliminates the boundaries between previously distinct industries. This is why when you say to a retailer, what industry are you in? A retailer will say, we're in the business of selling things. If you go to a car company, we're in the business of selling cars or mobility. If you go to finance and banks, they say, we are in the business of opening savings accounts, providing loans and mortgages, and so on and so forth. If you go to a technology company like a Google, like an Amazon, and you say, what industry are you in? They will say, oh, we're in entertainment. We are in retail. We are in healthcare. We are in insurance. We're in finance. And it's this kind of mentality where when you speak to the vast majority of leaders who are not from a tech background or from the tech industry, you ask them what business they're in, they just highlight their own industry.
But you do not dominate one industry.
Well,
To start master this really good. So you stop joining with too many goals.
Well, this is it. So you can, so there's kind of a danger in that play. On the one hand, if you become the absolute, we'll take Mercedes. I mean, then there's a couple of different ways I could take this particular example. So take Mercedes. So Mercedes build the best cars that they can. They do the best marketing and advertising that they can, provide the best service that they can, etc. And when people look at Mercedes globally, they go, there's a company that has it together. However, Mercedes missed BYD. So as the Chinese automotive industry was building for 10 years, the entire German automotive industry missed what China was doing. The 1,600 entrants basically coming into the market, 30% cutting costs by 30%.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, Mercedes basically says, as an organization, if you went to the Mercedes CEO and said, how do you think you do it? He'd be saying, I think we're doing well. Good market share, good market penetration, good brand awareness, all the good things. But they're going to start, like VW, they're going to start getting smacked around the head by China's brands.
Right.
So on one hand, organizations need to be able to see how they might be disrupted. They need to be able to respond quickly. But then in addition to that, what happens basically when that market's no longer relevant? So I'll use another example. We'll come back to Waymo. So Mercedes are in the business of selling cars. We could say selling mobility, but their business model at the moment is, as a consumer, I go into one of their dealerships, I buy a Mercedes, I get in it, I drive it around. if we have self-driving cars in every city that I call up on demand like an Uber, bearing in mind that my car sits in the driveway 95% of the time, just gather dust, why do I need to buy Mercedes in the first place? So that's another disruption for Mercedes. However, what you have with things like, say, Tesla robotaxis, yeah. Another business model. I buy my Tesla vehicle. It eventually has full self-driving capability. Like a traditional car, it sits on the driveway 95% of the time. Now, what happens if, when that car is sitting on the driveway, someone calls it up, and now it's a robo-taxi, but I take 70% of the profits of that journey?
Yes.
Would I want to buy a Tesla, outside of what Elon Musk said we've been doing, but would I want to buy a Tesla or a Mercedes? Because I buy a Mercedes for, say, 50,000 euro, it's a depreciating asset. I buy a Tesla for 50,000 euros on a lease, and actually it makes me 200,000 euros.
Yeah.
So the danger, while being the dominant incumbent within a market, seems to tick all the right boxes. Shareholders love it. The CEOs can say, we're doing well. We are the 400-gram gorilla. There are all of these different ways to take down the biggest incumbent.
So does any product and service has a lifespan? When we talk about the product life cycle, are we saying at one point, okay, engine run cars are then over? Or let's say traditional music, we both still know the LPs, and we had the cassettes, and we had the CDs, the DVDs, Blu-ray, and the online streaming. So will online streaming also will have an end?
Yeah. So if we have a look at online streaming, for example, you use Netflix, presumably. Okay, so you go onto Netflix, and I go onto Netflix, and we're actually watching exactly the same series. So where streaming ultimately goes is, on the one hand, artificial intelligence will increasingly say, you're this kind of person, so I'm going to make this kind of content for you on the fly. I'm this kind of person, so I actually see maybe the same sort of series that you're watching, but I kind of see a different version of it because it's tailored to me. So on the one hand, we see streaming being tailored at that point. However, when we actually think about how leaders really start defending their positions, increasingly distribution is the mode. Because now, say, for example, we both have a great idea. Say, right, we're going to develop a business, whatever it is, selling products. So we're going to create a business. You have one follower.
Yeah.
However we term followers, I have 1 billion followers. So my distribution is much better than yours. So we can create exactly the same products, but my ability to get it to the end consumer, whether that's a human or a robot, is much better than yours. Therefore, I kind of win. With distribution, I now have an advantage as a marketplace. So with exactly the same product, I've now sold whatever it is that I'm selling. I'm selling it one plant to everyone who follows me, all in my distribution profile. I've sold 1 billion plants.
Right.
And you now think, right, well, as a competitive CEO, you think, I can't let Matt win. Can't let him win. So what you do is you drop the price, you come up with an amazing, brand new, genetically engineered, glow-in-the-dark plant, etc., etc. So you're really trying to ratchet up your innovation to try to get near me. If you haven't got that distribution, you'll sell more glow-in-the-dark plants than you might have sold other ones, because it's a quirky novelty and everything else. I still have distribution. Distribution is increasingly my mode. And it's that a lot of CEOs don't get. But then in terms of stickiness, you've got your glow-in-the-dark plants. It's great. Love that. I'm selling 1 billion regular plants. Now I start moving into alternative markets.
Right.
So now I'm providing plant husbandry services, facilities management services, and everything else. So as you want to be an incumbent in your own industry, selling plants, you're still trying to compete against me. But because I now have a multi-sided model, I can say, I don't have glow-in-the-dark plants, but I will give these plants away to everyone. because I'm now making my money from other things. And so customers are now stickier to me than they are to you.
Toward the business model, that's yeah, nice. I also am now super happy that I finally know the future of online streaming. I think it's anyhow very interesting that Netflix went to Blockbuster at one point and said, guys, you want to buy us, I think, for a very cheap amount. And they said, no, we don't believe in online streaming. And now online streaming, everybody knows. And now I know the future that you say when we both watch the same series. You maybe, I watch maybe the series and the main actor is a blonde woman. You, because the AI knows who is like blonde, it's a different heavy on interesting.
But this is where now, from a streaming perspective, Netflix last year spent $15 billion developing new content. Yeah. So one of the biggest problems that streaming platforms like Disney Plus and so on and so forth have is they're having to spend literally tens of billions of dollars creating content. Now we can see in the next 2 to 3 years that AI will be able to create a eyebrow raising movie. Maybe not a great one, but a good-ish movie. So the cost of me being able to create an entertaining movie or TV series is starting to drop to zero. Okay. And it's the same for Netflix. As Netflix start leaning into the use of artificial intelligence tools, they don't need to invest in studios and so on and so forth. Within that AI dubbing, they can create content in South Korea, then they can dub it entirely to German or English for pretty much no money whatsoever. So as the cost of creating content drops, what Netflix and Paramount and these other companies will find is that all of a sudden they're up against millions of people who are creating good content. But this is where distribution comes into it again, because you'll have 1 million people who can now make decent quality movies and they've got a free YouTube channel and so on and so forth. But if they don't have the same distribution as Netflix or Paramount or Disney Plus, they will get views. But I'm still subscribing to Netflix.
So I can basically say, in Netflix, I would like to watch a movie 77 minutes long, action movie with a little bit of crime, the German language, put also love story in, and end off, and happy, in this love. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. You also had an interesting path, career. So you studied marine biology.
Yeah. So,
and then you went to work in the corporate world as well. Dell, EMC, then also IDM and Atos.
yeah.
And then you said, since 2016, I want to be a full-time futurist. What is this super for?
So my superpower is trying to help people reach their full potential. That's it. So one of the reasons basically why I came out of full-time employment. So I ran IBM's national security divisions. I ran Atos's cloud divisions, etc., was simply because, as many people can probably sort of empathize with, when you're working for large corporate organizations, you say, this is my passion, this is what I would like to do. And they go, yeah, but we need you to do this. And so you end up getting locked into a title or a role or a career path that you didn't necessarily plan. So when we sort of take the example of IBM being disrupted by cloud, IBM's response to being disrupted by cloud computing was they lost most of their market value. They made 50,000 people redundant. So because IBM maybe couldn't quantify the future correctly, let alone move, they lost half the market value and they made 50,000 people redundant. That's the wrong kind of business model for any company. When you speak to any CFO, you say, what really matters to you as a CFO? They say, our people are our biggest asset. And then as companies get into trouble, they go, bye-bye. So what I wanted to try to do is to see if there was a way that you could actually develop a future in which companies profited, because companies want to get bigger, make more profits, grow, etc., but that also took people with them. And what we have at companies like Accenture, Accenture were a very different story to IBM. They saw the future coming, which in their case was digital transformation in the very early days. They weren't really sure what it was, why it was. They weren't really sure whether it would be successful or not. They leaned into it, unlike IBM. Because they leaned into it, they wanted to understand a bit more about what the future would look like. What's the future of the company look like? As a result of that, what future goals and people should we have? What skills should those people have?
But to really also paint an organigram of the future.
Yeah.
I think that's also the big hint for everyone listening. We do this too. I do this always. How will the org structure look in 2 years, 3 years? That's great.
And, with Accenture, they took should we say, a sneaky peek at the future.
Right.
Made a couple of bets, hired people, and whereas IBM saw the future and didn't do anything about it and lost half the company's value, Accenture saw the future. They had the right internal culture to discuss it, debate it, quantify and qualify it and everything else. They decided to move. Accenture went from $20 billion in revenue to $65 billion in revenue. So this is sort of why, from a leadership perspective, we talked about DNA as leaders earlier. Culture does matter, but you have to be willing to take risks.
What have been your key learnings during your time at IBM and when you worked with Dell?
I took marine biology and marine biology and oceanography, so I was a scientist by background, fell into the technology industry, exerted sort of by accident and everything else, got hired by EMC to do inline sales and external sales, senior account management, then ended up being a manager, an area manager for the enterprise business. I think the key learning was from most of the organizations that I worked with is while most of those organizations talk about putting people at the heart of the business, upskilling people, making people better, the vast majority of companies leave you in a position, I'll say to them not, but you end up getting promoted if you're doing well and everything else. But I think the vast majority of companies basically see you as a cog in the machine. They don't necessarily think, how could you be driving this machine? How could you help us do more, be better? How could you help the company change? What ideas do you have that could actually help the company expand into new markets or whatever it happens to be? So I think the vast majority of organizations, while they talk about the importance of human capital, actually don't ever tap anywhere near into the human capital they have.
To really use potential, awesome people. Yes. Then in 2016, you said, I'm going off full-time.
Yeah.
Let's go. I'm a full-time self-employed. Let's go crazy.
Yeah.
Now we with a different year.
Yeah.
When you could go back to 2016, what would you tell yourself when people listening now are starting their own business?
I'd say have more faith in yourself. So when I came out of Atos in that particular case to start the company, I said to people, and it was different geographically. I'd say to people in Europe, I used to be global head cloud for Atos. I've now decided to become a founder, a CEO, an entrepreneur. And within Europe, people say, you're unemployed. So, wow. And I said, well, no, I've started a company. Now in America, you'd say, I've come out of Atos, I've now started a company. They would say, well done. Yeah. Wow, it's great. But then I also think, from a journey perspective, I kind of often joke that when I started a company, I was able to give myself the title of CEO, but I was also chief bottle washer, janitor, head of marketing, head of sales, head of HR, head of legal, head of, accounts and that kind of stuff. And I think the one thing that the vast majority of entrepreneurs kind of struggle with is prioritize what's important, because it's far too easy to get consumed basically with the administrative stuff that doesn't necessarily move you forward as a person or your business. Have faith in yourself, prioritize your mental resilience and your mental health, because as I think any founder will be able to attest, it's not easy. If you want to do something easy, go and get a job for a company. If you want to do something that's going to drive you batshit bonkers, start to get on.
And if you really want to go crazy, do a software company, I'd say, or fintech company.
Yeah.
That's nice for me. Yeah, but it's also enjoy the journey.
Yeah. But this is the thing. but whether it's leadership teams basically within established organizations or founders, again, one of the things that I say on LinkedIn, I have a video, and it's a sort of 2-minute 30 video, and it's literally about mental health, but it just says, take time out.
Yeah.
As an individual, and when you speak to almost anybody in any country, you say, when was the last time you stepped back from whatever it is that you're doing, you took yourself out and all of the things that you're doing, all of the situations that you're in, and you just breathed, and you just went for 10 minutes. You just didn't think about anything. You just paused. Yeah, you kind of, and you sort of look at what you've accomplished, and you go, whatever it happens to be. And the vast majority, 99+% of people say, I never take time out for myself. I never prioritize myself. I never really reset my purpose. I never take that time to really think, is this something that I want to do? Is my passion here or is it here?
Good point.
And it's without your mental health, everything else falls down. You could be the founder of a highly successful software company, but if your mental health suffers, not only physical health, but if your mental health suffers, the company suffers. What you built suffers.
Super important, I think, goals, physical and mental health. Absolutely. Now you actually advise and worked with presidents, with Fortune 50 CEOs, the UN, and much more. What could you find for characteristics of the really successful people who really bring things forward towards the people who, what do the 20% do to achieve, say, the result?
So the companies I work with, I work with all Fortune 10, for example. So I work all the way basically from kind of Fortune 10, so it's companies like Google and Walmart and Microsoft and those kinds of guys, all the way down basically to, sort of companies that are turning over a couple of $100 million, $1 billion, and so on and so forth. Attitude is critical. So the ones that are more likely to be successful and or are able to demonstrate that they have been successful, they have a sort of challenges mindset. They are curious, like we discussed earlier. They're open-minded. They want to know more about not just the future, but everything, so they're kind of like information hogs. They're very good basically at leading, so not delegating, but they're very good at so Nelson Mandela always had a sort of an interesting view. When people said to you, what do you think makes you a great leader? He said, well, that's what other people say. He said, I would ask people their opinions, and I'd always be the last one to speak. So, we'd come into a boardroom or a conference room, whatever it happened to be, and I said, well, what do we think about X, Y, and Z? And he would let everyone speak first. Because in his particular case, as with most leaders' cases, if I say, I want to know what you think about the future of plants, this is what my team is about the future of plants, you might then say, I agree with you. So empowering people, giving other people a voice, basically trusting your workforce, putting your workforce out of their comfort zones. And again, the other thing that separates the good leader, I should say good companies, but it is leadership, style, culture, and everything else from the others, is it's all very well talking about something, but if you don't act, if you aren't fundamental, so you've got the strategic leader that looks at the future and says, right, this is where we think the market's going to be. However, you also need a leader who can execute. It's that tactical leader. So you've got a strategic leader, big vision,
Understand but also
tell me what's happening, I'm interested in what you're saying, etc. That is then able to marry that kind of strategic leadership piece with the tactical leadership piece of, I've heard what you said, so this is now what we're going to do. A, B, C, D, you go and get it done.
Very quick at the end, how will the future look like? So what are the key technologies we should look at now in any business, more or less, in the next 5 to 10 years?
So it depends very much on the industry that you're actually in.
Yeah.
But what we have,
I should go all over.
Yeah. So artificial intelligence is what we call a general purpose technology.
Right.
So when we have a look at AI, increasingly the cost of knowledge is dropping to zero.
Yeah.
The cost of intelligence is dropping to zero. So as business leaders, what does your business look like when knowledge costs nothing and intelligence costs?
How smart is AI now compared to the brain, the human brain?
So Google Gemini 2.5, the latest Mensa, because we use human benchmark still, the latest Mensa IQ put it at 136. ChatGPT's IQ is 155. Over the next 1 to 2 years, basically we see AI with an IQ of about 300 to 600.
Wow.
When we look at artificial general intelligence, so this is now where we look sort of that 2027, 2028 piece. We generally believe that AI will have an IQ of 1600 and 1 billion times more general knowledge than a human. So again, when we're talking about that earlier, about how do we sort of look at the future, as a business leader, if we can see these trajectories and these directions, what does my business look like when I have access to an AI that has access to 1 billion times more general knowledge than a human and an IQ of 1600?
Are you excited for it or are you afraid of it?
So both. I'm excited for it because on one hand, we have AI automates jobs and skills, but it democratizes access to those skills. I'm not a software developer, but increasingly, thanks to agentic software, or agentic software engineers, I'm becoming a software developer. So AI is increasingly democratizing access to skills, expertise, intelligence, and knowledge. Now, from an individual perspective, when you say to people, okay, if the only things that you have access to are all the world's knowledge, let's take an entrepreneur. What happens when the only things you have access to are all the world's knowledge, all the world's skills, all the world's intelligence, and a global connected marketplace, basically 4 to 5 billion people.
Right.
As an entrepreneur, what would you do with that? And everyone I speak to this will go, I've got no clue. I've got no clue at all. Because education is teaching us to be employed by a company. Education, today's education systems, whether it's primary, secondary, or tertiary education, isn't teaching us what do you do with your life when you have access to all of this immense power. In 2 years' time, as per sort of Eric Schmidt, I should be able to use artificial intelligence to create a TikTok clone, a Workday clone, a Salesforce clone, like that. And we can see that already emerging now. So from an individual perspective, this is really where we then bring it back and say, well, what's your passion? What's your purpose? What's your North Star? Because if your North Star is, I want to build great software, then the rest is, well, how do I do that? Well, that's tools and these other skills, things like that. These are the markets, say all that out. The vast majority of us, we have access to all of this intelligence, all of this stuff. And if I said to you, how would you get the most out of it? The vast majority of people go, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah. So it sounds to me that in the near future, we have probably more AI agent working for us in companies than probably real humans. But I'm excited for the future.
Yeah.
Matthew, it was an honor to talk to you, and I'm excited to talk to you and see you in the future again.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Before you go, a quick note to all the entrepreneurial listeners out there. If you're looking for a reliable and efficient way to scale your online business and payments, I highly recommend checking out Kloep.com. It's designed to streamline your processes from payment processing to customer management, all in one platform. Whether you're just starting out or you're looking to scale up, Kloep provides the tools you need to succeed. Visit Kloep.com today and see how it can transform your business operations. Dive in and start optimizing your sales processes now.